Hello, I am Chris William, and I am the executive producer and moderator for the widely watched and long syndicated PBS series Carolina Business Review, seen across the Carolinas on both ETV in South Carolina, UNC TV in North Carolina, and PBS Charlotte. And one of the guests on our program has been a leader in South Carolina for a long time. He is the president, chief executive officer of the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce. He was the chief of staff for former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, and also served in the South Carolina House of Representatives in the early 2000s, joining us, I think, safely now from his home office is that man, the president and CEO of the South Carolina Chamber, Ted Pitts. Ted, welcome, and you look healthy.
Yeah, Chris, things are good and trying to adjust working from home like others. So, happy to be on the show.
Ted, we're gonna take the next 10 or 15 minutes and talk to you a little bit about South Carolina. Was one of the first adopters of what a restart looks like. You are part of an almost 30-member commission that the governor set up called Accelerate South Carolina that has, and this is my term, Ted, has the specific commission to reopen South Carolina. First question, is that an accurate depiction? And number two, what is the current state of reopening?
Yeah, so first you have to look at the governor's orders. So Governor McMaster, I believe, kind of shut South Carolina or slowed South Carolina down in the best manner. If you look at what other states have done across the country, he identified some businesses, high-risk businesses, and he shut them down. Most other businesses were allowed to follow safety precautions and remain open. So as we look to reopen South Carolina's economy, we don't have as much work to do as other states do, but the governor has created Accelerate SC, a task force that's given him recommendations and advising him on how we can get South Carolina's economy restarted, because it definitely has slowed down. We're in a recession, and we've got to make sure that that we quickly get out of this.
Ted, this is not going to be lost on you, and I'm sure you debated across the table or virtually across the table in Accelerate South Carolina's membership. How do you balance? What's the debate like? One-on-one, small groups, when you're talking about balancing personal liberties and also the public health, what does that look like? And is there an easy answer to that question?
So there's not an easy answer to the question. We have members, obviously, that don't think anything should have been shut down, but we have a large segment of our membership that thinks we've got to make sure that we get control of the pandemic, which I believe we have, and we've got to follow safety guidelines. So, ultimately, when you look at personal liberties, there are some things that we have to do temporarily to keep folks safe. And I think in South Carolina, our citizens have done that, and that's why the curve's been flattened, and our hospitals, actually are looking for customers, not overwhelmed with COVID patients. So, there is a balance there, and I think Governor McMaster has taken that balance. We close schools for the rest of the year, so my 3 children are e-learning or learning from home. That was the prudent thing to do, but I will tell you, our kids need to be in schools when school starts back in the fall, and we have to find a way to safely do that. Just like we have to find a way to safely get workers back into their place of work and business humming along again.
When you look at the carnage in the hospitality industry, specifically in restaurants, in lodging, and some of the lodging now short-term has been open to some degree, but when you look at how that whole industry, in my term, eviscerated, what's the sensitivity for specifically looking at that business that makes up a good part of tourism, which is a big part of South Carolina's general revenue? How do you address that? How do you make sure, again, back to the idea of being safe, but also giving those entrepreneurs in that industry the opportunity to make money and to get back on their feet?
Well, a big piece of South Carolina's economy is hospitality and tourism, and it has been hit the hardest of any industry. So when you look at our unemployment numbers, a lot of those folks are actually out of that industry. And so I think we're hopeful as the summer, as things start to return to some sense of normalcy or the new normal, that folks probably are looking for drive destinations. We're hoping that South Carolina is at the top of that list, and Dwayne Parrish at PRT and the regional partners are working to try to position South Carolina in that light, with folks looking for places to go to the beach, or the mountains. So ultimately, it's been hit really hard. The restaurant industry, specifically across this country, has been hit really hard, decimated in some cases. So we've got to find ways to reopen them up. And Governor McMaster this past week issued an order that allows for outside dining to take place, and we're in the process of looking to, some limited inside dining to take place. But restaurateurs, they understand safety more than anybody. They've had to live with it, their entire business career. So health and safety inspectors, they're used to that. So, I have confidence that the restaurant industry will be able to get back and make folks feel comfortable to come in and dine. And I would encourage everybody, like folks have done, is get takeout or buy a gift certificate from your local restaurant and try to help them get started. And many of them applied for the PPP loans and hopefully receive those, but hopefully that will allow them to bridge this time and get back to operation soon.
Ted, do you think when you go through the idea of this reopening and you look along the Grand Strand, and let me single out Myrtle Beach and the Grand Strand particularly, because they have announced that they are open for business and they're doing it in an orderly way. But still, when you hear that, when you see that, is that cringeworthy that you think about Myrtle Beach, Sullivan's Island, Charleston counties, any of the beaches that tend to be overpopulated, and there will be this rush of people that want to get back to normal? Is that something that could be a real risk?
So, I think if you're following CDC guidelines and you're outside, there obviously is a concern, but I think ultimately folks have to use common sense. And, you talked about personal liberties, in a lot of cases, the government can't protect us from ourselves. So we've got to clearly communicate guidelines to businesses and South Carolinians, and they've got to follow those guidelines. And if they don't, then we're going to have problems. So, government has to communicate clearly what, best practices are and what folks should and shouldn't do. And then people have to use common sense and follow those guidelines.
Do you feel like the governor or the state will have enough teeth in enforcement to hold people accountable to stick to the guidelines?
So, in some cases, folks will maybe fight those guidelines, but I think local governments and neighbors, quite frankly, your fellow citizens, we've got to come together and do it. So will government be able to enforce every guideline? No, they can't enforce every law that's on the books. Don't have the manpower, or there's really not a risk there. But I do think people holding each other, your neighbors, accountable and looking out. When you wear a mask, that mask isn't for you; it's for the people that you're around. So looking out for others. We've got to have common sense, and then we have to have folks look out for their neighbors.
Two dynamics that come up, Ted, is the idea that there is some type of government help for folks that are unemployed. How do you pivot? To use a term that's already overused, how do you pivot from the idea that there is some type of non-motivation for people to go back to work if they have I'm going to just call it an unemployment benefit or a COVID-19 related unemployment benefit? That's the first thing. And then the other dynamic in there is the working poor or the low income that have been disproportionately hit by this illness.
Yeah, so two things. The first, the unemployment piece. So everybody knows that Congress passed a bill that provides an extra $600 a week on top of the state benefit. So in a lot of cases, folks that have been furloughed, and the chamber, we just recently did a survey. That chamber survey said, of the almost 5,000 businesses that responded, 40% of them have already furloughed or laid off employees. So those employees, through the end of July, not only get the state unemployment benefit, but they also get the federal COVID benefit, which it equals about $1,000 a week. So there are companies that that say we pay $15 an hour and you're making $21 an hour on unemployment benefit. Why are you going to come back to work? Well, the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce has a form that you fill out. If you have called a employee back to work and they refuse, you fill out the form and they get their benefits terminated. But we know that in some cases, employers say, hey, I really need them to come back on August 1st. So I don't want to get in a conflict with them over this. So I'm just going to wait. We know that's a problem. And Senator Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott both talk about it frequently. They were at an Accelerate SC meeting and talked about it there. It's a problem, and it expires at the end of July, and we need for that benefit, which was intended to make people whole, we need for it to not make people more than whole, which it currently does. So it's an issue, and ultimately something that Congress will have to address. And the reality is it's in place through the end of July, and we'll have to deal with it. And then after that, hopefully businesses will start up. I mentioned the 40% that said they had already furloughed folks or laid people off. Of that 40%, 43% of that group that's already furloughed or laid people off had said they don't plan on bringing it back 100% of their employees back within the next 3 months. So, when you hear people talk about us getting out of this thing, quick, it's a V-shaped recovery. It doesn't look like this is going to be a V-shaped recovery. And I think our unemployment rolls will continue to be, to have more folks on them, obviously, than before this hit us when we were at record lows. And that's something that policymakers have to look at, and something we're going to have to live with.
One of the final question, Ted, and I know you've got plenty of meetings stacked up, even though whether they're video or on the phone, so I'll let you go. But one of the long simmering debates in the Carolinas has been, because there is a lot of rural community worker and also rural community life, that broadband access has been debated in the State House for a long time. Does this now make legislators much more sympathetic about fully funding whatever a broadband initiative looks like? And would you expect that the backbone of this rural connectivity would be realized this year?
Yeah, so that's been really kind of the biggest thing that I've heard folks talk about that's come out of this. When you look at telehealth or telemedicine, when you look at education, kids e-learning, when you look at work from home opportunities, I think broadband is the thing that folks are talking about. And it's been, Congressman Clyburn in DC it's been a long passion of his. And now you're hearing Tim Scott, Senator Scott, and others talking about it. I think there's going to be funding on the federal level. It's infrastructure. There's going to be funding on the federal level. We wrote a letter to the federal delegation saying, if you're going to pass an infrastructure bill, rural broadband should be on that list. And on the state level, at our last Accelerate SC committee meeting, Governor McMaster, former Senator Greg Ryberg, leading a group that is going to figure out how to spend the pot of money that the state gets related to COVID. And that's something that a lot of conversation has occurred around. And then, obviously Senator Alexander and Senator Tom Davis and many others, on the state level have been talking about how do we do this. We have an opportunity. So this situation we're in, there are opportunities, and I think rural broadband is one of those that will get addressed as they look to provide solutions.
Ted, thanks for taking the time. Hope you continue to stay safe, and best of luck on Accelerate SC, and thanks for your leadership.
Nope, and I look forward to being back in the studio with you soon.